dwell in a house among his people. But now he has a home that's better than the first. It doesn't look like a building with a steeple. Now he's living in the people of the church. Brick after brick, God is building his temple. Brick after brick, he's making it strong. With Christ the sure foundation and his people as the stones, he is building a place he can live. Brick after brick.
Morning, friends. I'm quite sure I can speak for the whole preaching team here when I say that we're all grateful to have these opportunities to speak to you like this, and this is an important opportunity to serve for us. And Rev has made a point of making that available and helping us along the way. In your lives, you don't necessarily have to be up here to serve, as a number of you have shown by example many times. The important thing is to try saying yes. When somebody's got something, you might want to give a whirl, and you'd be surprised what can happen. You'd be surprised what God can do with you. You'll be surprised who he might put in your path to help you along as well, and what can happen as a result. It can be a really small thing, but you can be really surprised with the results. God likes to do big things with small things. Amen? I want to just tell you a really short story as we get started here. A dear old friend of mine once told me he made a habit of taking his Bible with him when he'd go to work. So at lunchtime, he'd he'd have something, he'd get a chance to sit there and he'd read his Bible for a little while. And this same guy would be nearby, one of his co-workers. And so this went on for a period of time. Finally, the guy went up to him and he said, "Aren't you done with that book yet?" And the thing we know as Christians is we're never done with that book. This week was another example of the many times I've gone in there and looked at something I've seen before a number of times and went, "Oh, I didn't know that," or "I didn't look at it that way," or "I never really thought that part of it was such a big deal." What I'm hoping is you're going to see a little bit of that today as we go to a very familiar spot in Scripture, the Psalm 91. It says, "You will not fear the terror of the night, nor the arrow that flies by day." So we're going to be talking about fear and God's protection today. Psalm 91, depending on who you ask, is either a psalm by Moses, according to the Jewish tradition, or by David, according to the folks who put the Septuagint together, the Greek translation of the Old Testament. Nobody actually knows for sure. But there's certainly a lot of important things for us to see in Psalm 91. And this sort of struck me, this particular line got my attention. And I always this whole thing about the arrow, this has been stirring around in my head for the longest time. And I couldn't help but think there's got to be some kind of a sermon there. And one of these days I'll get the idea and I'll be, well, today's the day, apparently. So let's call this "Don't Fear the Arrow," or anything else. Let's kind of read through it. We're going to read through mainly like the first half of Psalm 91. "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. For he will deliver you from the snare of the fowler and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with his pinions, and under his wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness is a shield and buckler. You will not fear the terror of the night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that stalks in darkness, nor the destruction that wastes at noonday. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. You will only look with your eyes and see the recompense of the wicked." This whole idea about the arrow. So I started thinking a lot about arrows and warfare. I have a certain amount of interest in some of this, things they did in medieval times with knights and swords and shields and arrows and all that kind of stuff, and arrows are an interesting kind of a weapon. They're a distance weapon. Generally speaking, you don't walk up to somebody 3 feet away and shoot them with an arrow. You don't walk up to them with an arrow and stick it in them. And arrows have been used in warfare very effectively, where you have two armies getting ready to go at it, and one of them will put their archers out front first, and they'll just unleash a slew of arrows, try to soften the enemy up a little bit before they get close. This cloud of arrows coming at you, you can't get out of the way because there's hundreds of them coming at you all at once. So it was a very effective weapon. What you see here is basically, I believe, an English longbow. The English were famous for their archery skills, and it could be employed very, very effectively. There are all kinds of arrows that might come our way in our lives. Some of them have to do with our personal lives. It can be trouble with relationships. It can be trouble on the home front. It can be trouble in people we work with. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong with our own lives as individuals. More specifically, it could be a health issue. Now, a health issue is going to not only affect you, but your whole family. It'll affect your workplace if you're out. It'll affect your church because you can't be there. So a health issue can be a big thing to get hit with. It can lead, it's not the only thing that can lead to it, but many things can lead to financial difficulties as well. It's hard to be calm, cool, and collected when you run out of money, isn't it? Unrest. A lot of folks we are so fortunate in this country for all the hassles, for all the acrimonious talk, for all the stuff we've got going on. We don't have civil unrest the way some other countries do. For a lot of people, that's a big deal because their whole way of life is unstable. What about personal safety? This is something we're seeing to various degrees throughout the world. Even in this country now, it's gotten to the point where some folks are afraid to go to the movies or to go to the mall because they don't know if some crazy is going to shoot at them. Safety can even be a concern on the home front with an abusive spouse. Is he going to hit me today? The Bible talks about arrows, talks about flaming arrows, right? We're familiar with that. In Ephesians 6, we see, in all circumstances, take up the shield of faith with which you can extinguish all the flaming darts of the evil one. Make no mistake, there are plenty of them. There is a whole demonic network, and they've all got bows and arrows. They're all coming at everybody all the time. But out of these things, I believe the most dangerous arrows hit you in the mind. These are the poisoned arrows. You might be familiar with this concept where they'll take an arrow, dip it in poison, and shoot it at somebody. So if you get hit with the arrow, it might not even be a big deal. It might just get you in the arm. You pull it out, think you can go on, but what you don't realize is you've been poisoned, and you die anyway. So it's something that stays in your system. For example, bitterness. Something we can't let go of, something we've been hurt by, someone we've been hurt by. There's a problem there, and we just can't get it out. Where our attitude has been changed. It could be a place, it could be a group, it could be a church. It's something that's caused a bitter attitude. Gives you that sour taste in your mouth all the time whenever you think about this. It's a poison arrow in the mind. Envy. When you just can't understand why you don't have what someone else has. Why you don't have that situation that they have. Why can't it be me? I don't care, that person hurt me a long time ago and I can't let go of it. Unforgiveness, right? And way back, before we even existed, God already had it in his mind to be able to forgive everything that we've done and everything that we'll be doing yet. How can we do any less? See, that unforgiveness is a poison arrow in the mind. Because you can't let go of it. It just keeps coming back. Sometimes, years later, you think you've gotten past it. But it's still there. And you find yourself saying, why am I still thinking about this? Why can't I let this go? Was it really that big a deal? If it is, maybe there's someone you need to have a conversation with. Guilt. When we talk about forgiveness, sometimes it's hard for us to truly accept God's forgiveness. We still feel bad. We still feel guilty. We don't feel released. As a result, we walk around with shame. This can be a particular problem for believers because you think, I should know better. How could I have done that? Shame, interestingly enough, kind of ties into the worst poison arrow of all, which is pride. If you can't seem to let go of shame for things that you've been forgiven of, maybe it's because you are putting a different standard on yourself than there is on everybody else. What makes you any different than the rest of us, who all have something to be ashamed of? Anybody here doesn't have anything in their lives that to be ashamed of at one time or another? I don't even have to ask because I know the answer is no. We all suffer from that. But it will paralyze you. And pride will really paralyze you because as soon as you start thinking you're all that, it's over. You cannot serve God with a prideful heart. You need to push yourself aside and let the Lord come in. It's the deadliest poison arrow of all. So let's start to get into some of the, we're not going to go line by line everything here, but we are going to talk about some of the important concepts in Psalm 91. It says, he who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. It's kind of interesting, this idea of abiding in someone's shadow. Our modern culture tends to say just the opposite, doesn't it? I don't want to be in someone's shadow. I want to shine. I want people to see me. I want to be out there. I can do this. Talking about pride. But the idea of being in someone's shadow, in this case, I want you to think about a physical closeness. What does it mean to be in someone's shadow? If you're close enough to stand in their shadow, you're pretty close to them, right? Well, one of the advantages to that is they're between you and what's out there to get you. We want to be in God's shadow. That's how close we want to be. That's what's being said here. What does it mean to be in the shadow? It means to be so close to God that you're literally standing in His shadow. Why is that important? Because the closer you are to Him, the better off you're going to be in terms of being delivered from what's waiting to hurt you. He'll deliver you from the snare of the fowler. There are some interesting bird-related images here that I really found fascinating. This is a fowler's snare. A fowler is someone who traps birds. What will happen is the bird will land in the snare, and it will snap shut. Now, there are a variety of forms of this. Some of them are as simple as a board and a stick. But the point is that this is just waiting there for you to fall into it. Sometimes when people feel like God's not necessarily taken so much of an active role in their lives protecting them, we don't know how many of these traps He's directed us away from because it would mess up His plan for us. Because it's something He didn't want us to go through. He's not going to announce it every time He points your life in the right direction. I can guarantee you there are a number of these fowler's snares that we've avoided because of God's love for us. He will cover you with His pinions, and under His wings you will find refuge. Sound like pinions, all right. It's got to have something to do with wings, but I'm not sure what, so I had to look it up. This refers to when you see a bird flying, this has to do with the hinged part of the wing and the feathers, the flight feathers. So this is what makes the wing bendable. So if you think about being under God's wings, that's what they're talking about. It's being very specific here about the part of the wing. Where do you find refuge? Under there in God's shadow. That's where you want to be. That close. As you see the little guy under Mom's wings here. She's giving him a little security. Now, if you think about that, there's a reference in the New Testament, right? Where Jesus laments over Jerusalem, and He says He wishes He could cover them the way a hen covers their chicks with their wings. But I want to point something out to you here. There's a stronger message here than even that. What's being said here is, if you want to get to them, you've got to come through me. You can't have them, devil, because they're mine. That's what Jesus is saying here, and even in the Old Testament to us. That's what being under God's wings means, because you don't take on the Lord and win. That's what we're talking about here, God's protection. Now, everybody's fearful at one time or another of something. As we've talked about earlier, there's plenty of things to hassle you and needle you and make you afraid. right? Some of those arrows in the mind we talked about earlier, they're a source of a lot of problems, right? They're a source of worry. They can be a source of discouragement. But they make you fearful as well. They make you hesitant. You can't operate the way you should. So that element of fear comes in there. You're afraid to trust anybody because you've been hurt before. You're afraid to step out in faith because you've messed up in the past. You're afraid to do a lot of things because all these things are in your mind preventing you from moving forward in the Christian life because you're afraid to try any longer. Now, there are times when maybe you should be a little afraid of something. Fear is a natural self-preservation thing. There are some situations you shouldn't walk into because you'll get hurt. That's natural enough. But what has happened in terms of fear? Anybody heard the expression, so-and-so is afraid of their own shadow? Some folks are afraid of everything. They barely can function because they're so fearful of every little thing. And that's kind of how our world has gotten, right? How did we get that way? How did things get? Why are we so afraid all the time? Where does all that come from? It comes from the place you might expect. It comes from sin. It comes all the way back to the garden. Do you think Adam and Eve were initially walking around fearfully? They were good. They were happy. Things were going smoothly. As sin spread throughout the world, fear has spread throughout the world as evil has spread throughout the world. So people are, I think, or I've seen over the years, I see more fear than ever in society. The Bible has some interesting things to say about it repeatedly. It says, do not fear. It says, you will not fear. Fear not. Don't be afraid. Have no fear. For God gave us a spirit, not of fear. It's in the Bible hundreds of times. Why is it in there so many times? Why is it said so many different ways? Because we're so fearful all the time, because God knows how we are. We're afraid of our own shadow. Every little thing tends to scare us, tends to inhibit us, where even when we feel, you keep in mind when you're hesitant to do something, maybe because of past experiences. Well, why you say, well, I'm not afraid, I'm just a little cautious. Yeah, you are. You're afraid the results won't be what you thought they'd be. Maybe because you're carrying a few arrows around in your mind. Why does this have to be repeated so many times, again and again and again, so many different ways? Because it's one of those things that we need to be reminded of constantly. This is the most interesting one out of the group. I think it says, you will not fear. Now notice it doesn't say, you probably won't be afraid. You'd be okay. Or maybe you shouldn't, it's probably okay. It says you will not fear. Why? Because if you're living as part of God's family, if you belong to Jesus, if you're under his wings, if you're in his shadow, he's saying, well, then you shouldn't be afraid. Then don't be. It's a statement of what your condition should be. It's basically telling you, don't. See, there aren't any suggestions in Psalm 91, are there? It says, you won't be afraid. It's you will be protected. This is what's going to happen. It doesn't say maybe, or do you think you want to try this? There are no suggestions there. One of the things it says is his faithfulness is a shield and buckler. Now, when I first read this, I thought that it was just one of these cases in the Bible where they'll kind of restate something a couple of different ways just to make sure you get it. So I got a shield, a buckler, and everything, and I thought, why don't I double check just in case? So I looked up bucklers. There's all kinds of people on the internet can tell you about bucklers because they're into these reenactments of medieval warfare and all. So all about the swords and the shields and the armor and the weaponry. And there was this big discussion about bucklers. There was kind of a debate about what really made a buckler, et cetera, et cetera. Bottom line is, yes, it's a type of shield, but it's only a little one. A regular shield is one of those things you can really get behind, it just kind of covers up almost your whole body. But a buckler is just a little thing that just kind of attaches to your arm, or you can, kind of hold it. But it's just, it's nowhere near the size. So certainly, against arrows, it would be useless. But the thing of it is, whether or not you're holding it or it's attached to you or whatever, there's some function to it. It's a deflecting kind of thing. So when something comes at you, you can kind of hit it away. In fact, you can actively use it to defend yourself. So you have a weapon in one hand, and you've got either your shield or your buckler or whatever in the other. So what is the Bible saying here? Does it make a difference? It does. We talk about arrows and snares and pestilence and destruction and things that can come at you during the day, things that can come at you at night, things you see coming, things you don't see coming. God is aware of them all, and he has a variety of ways to defend against them to ensure that you can never be destroyed. That's the point. God's protection is comprehensive, it's personal, and it's promised. Think about way back when people first appeared. Lord had a few people to keep an eye on, right? And then a few more, and then a few more, and then a few more. And we're at the point today where he's got his eye on billions of people, and he's able to extend that same love, that same care, and that same protection that he always had, because it's unlimited for God, because nothing is impossible for him. Somebody asked me one time, how do I explain to a little kid about how, so many people can pray to God and stuff like that, and he can hear everybody, and there's so many people, how would he imagine, how can I get a child to understand that? And fortunately, since we're living in the computer age, I said, well, for me, it's kind of like when you do shopping on the internet, and a whole bunch of people are shopping all at the same time. Right? It's Black Friday, everybody's going crazy buying stuff, Well, they're all connecting to the same website, aren't they? They're all going to the same computer. The same servers are handling that. There's capacity there for, hundreds and thousands of requests all at the same time. So blow that up exponentially to the point where the capacity is unlimited. God has unlimited capacity to know about what everybody's doing at any given time. And yes, he can handle all of that. And yes, he can keep an eye on each and every one of you. And as that personal attention is the thing. God is completely interested in every single one of us. He's not just looking at the group saying, well, how are they doing overall? No, it's how's Andrea doing? Right? It's how's Angela doing? How's Stephanie doing? He knows how each one of you are doing. And he's got his eye on all of you. Exactly. Such a loving Father. I couldn't have said it better. Here's something. Talking about how the Psalms really point to Jesus. They're certainly not about us. Psalm 91, a little farther along, verses 11 and 12, which we see in Matthew 4, right? Temptation of Christ. For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. On their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone. Well, what Satan was saying there was absolutely true, right? God's protection. He was trying to trick Jesus, of course, and try to encourage him to do something he shouldn't do. And there was no way it was going to happen. Jesus wasn't falling for that. But the point here is, Jesus knew that his Father's protection would be in place. We know that our Father's protection will be in place for us as well. That's the lesson we want to take out of that. But having said that, don't walk around with a bullseye on your chest. Don't make it easy for arrows to come your way. Don't go out of your way to be a target. Satan has his own radio station. He's got his own cable TV channel. You might not see it, but it's there. Stop subscribing, stop listening. Learn to ignore it. You know what I'm talking about. There's plenty of places in our lives where we shouldn't be. There's plenty of people we shouldn't be talking to. There's plenty of people we shouldn't be hanging around with. There's a lot of situations we shouldn't be in. Don't do it. Don't make it easier. There's going to be enough stuff coming at you as it is. Don't go out of your way to be a target. And by the way, speaking of arrows, don't go shooting any of your own. There's plenty of that going on in the church as well. We have enough stuff coming our way now. Satan's already shooting enough stuff at. Don't be shooting arrows at each other. We need to care for each other. We should be building each other up, not knocking each other down. I want to show you something. This is called a tortoise. It's a battle formation. When the soldiers are trying to get close, but things are coming at them, arrows, whatever else, they're, especially if they're getting close to, say, an encampment of some sort, or like a fortress where they're liable to be throwing stuff at them. They gather their shields together to kind of make a protective shell, sort of like a turtle. Imagine how effective it would be We talked about the shield of faith, right, against the flaming arrows earlier. We take advantage of God's protection as a shield and buckler. Imagine if the church stands together holding our shields side by side against the things that are coming against us, and how effective that would be. Let's be a turtle. God's promise says 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. You will only look with your eyes and see the recompense of the wicked. It will not come near you. That's a pretty straightforward promise. Let's kick it up a notch. In Luke 21, it says, you will be delivered up even by parents and brothers and relatives and friends. Some of you they will put to death. You will be hated by all for your name's sake. But not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance you will gain your lives. Not a hair of your head will perish. What all this comes down to is the most important point, that no matter what else is going on, no matter how bad things get, no matter how bad things look, no matter how difficult it seems, Satan can't have you because you belong to Jesus Christ. What are we talking about again and again and again when we read our Bibles? What are we doing when we commemorate through communion of what Jesus did for us? What we want to remind ourselves is that Christ put it all out there for us. So we don't have to be afraid any longer. We have a shadow to stand in. We have wings to hide underneath. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and delivers them. What a nice, secure feeling. What a thing to think about, that God wants to provide security around you, that no matter how difficult things get, you cannot be destroyed. You have a heavenly home to look forward to one day. He makes the point in Joshua 1:9. If he hadn't been clear enough already, he says, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened. Do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. He's saying, didn't I tell you again and again, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to step up. Don't be afraid to speak for me. Don't be afraid to turn down those things that are not of God. Don't be afraid to keep on going no matter how many arrows come your way. Don't be afraid. Don't fear the arrow.
Brick after brick, God is building his temple. Brick after brick, he is making it strong. With Christ the sure foundation and his people as the stones, he is building a place he